Sherri, a CEO, speaker, coach, and author. As a business leader, I'm on a mission to empower women everywhere to embrace their most authentic self by challenging what you already know, then stretch to consider a different perspective. I share moments with people all over the world who are already on that path and are willing to share that perspective with me. Join me as we transparently consider this. Hey, y'all. We are back here again at the PrettyGirlsWork podcast. Consider this. Now, in these podcasts, if you're new to it, understand that we have conversations that explore how we, as leading businesswomen, can empower each other to be our most authentic selves. It is a rare commodity, believe it or not. We share practical ways to live authentically in our personal and our professional lives because there's a lot to consider: what to wear, when to speak up in a meeting, what to say, what not to say, how to connect our team and access their brilliance and have them connected to the vision in an authentic way. It's a lot. Every conversation will challenge you to think outside the box, to think differently, and to consider something from a different perspective. I'm hoping that you're getting comfortable. Join us as we together consider this. And today, well, we have someone who I've been a fan of for a minute and a half, a New York minute, actually. Today on our show, we are going to be talking to a multifaceted, inspirational boss who goes against the status quo, sometimes pushing against the status quo in the most authentic and empowering way. She's a public speaker. She's a master storyteller. She is the founder of The New Quo and so much more. Please welcome to Consider This, Christina Blacken. Christina!
Hello. What a lovely introduction. Wow. I'm like, ooh, I didn't even pay her to say that.
You go ahead. You did it. You know what? That comes from a very authentic place. I have no problem saying that I am one of your biggest fans, probably. Like I talk about you all the time. Let me just say how I got on to Miss Christina. So I bought a course last year. Last year. And it was Elisa Weinzimmer. And it was for my students. I wanted them to get confidence on camera. So I got that. And then for some reason, I'm just like this. I like to know who's teaching me. So I started looking into her. Oh, she's got a podcast. Oh, okay. And then I saw this one particular podcast about how we talk about race with Christina Blacken. I was like, let me hear about this. This little white lady talking about race. I'm in it. I'm here. I'm like, let me see what she got to say. You know, right. I went to the podcast with an attitude. I'll just say that.
You were expecting some nonsense. I can understand.
Yes, I did. And what I got was the opposite. I was so drawn in. I must have listened to it initially, probably about 2 or 3 times. I was like this. I was like, what? She's asking great questions. And she's so authentic. I love Elisa. And then I was like, who is this Christina? I don't understand. Where did she come from? Is she real? And then I had to look into who you were. And I was
a little digital hunt, trying to find the clues. Yeah.
I did it. And every time I would find something, I was like, oh my God, she's blowing my mind. She's blowing my mind. You're speaking my language. I love your work. Can you just tell us a little snippet before we even get into anything of who you are and what you do?
Yes. Well, I'm so glad you found me from that podcast. And it just shows you never know where in the digital world people will discover you. Sure. But I run a company called The New Quo. And at the core of it is really teaching people how to use the psychological power of storytelling and narrative to change behavior and to build more inclusive habits, culture, and relationships. Mm-hmm. And that really boils down to training and education on how we can use communication differently. So I've worked with leaders all over the world, Fortune 500 companies, VC-backed startups, to do things differently because most of our traditional business practices are broken. Yep. They've led to a lot of hot mess around us as we're experiencing in a pandemic. And my work is really inspired by my childhood of growing up as what I call an extreme minority in Utah and seeing how narrative shaped policy and practice and law and culture, and also working for 10 years in advertising and marketing and sales and using stories to get millions of people to do things that weren't that interesting or that useful. So I was like, wait a minute, if we can use story to get people to buy stuff they don't need,
Come
What would
on.
happen if we turned it inward and use it as a personal and professional development tool? And building the frameworks over time, I just started to experiment while working full time and then went on my own. And it's been a wild ride. I think at this stage, I've had around 24,000 people have interacted with my work.
Wow.
And that's been through online courses, facilitated conversations, and strategy consulting, and I also do performing. So sometimes I do storytelling performance and teach things around equity and inclusion and leadership through telling personal stories.
I love it. I love it. I think it's just such a brilliant thought to say, why don't we just tell a story to get this point across? Because it's one thing for somebody to say, let me tell you what you got to do. Let me tell you, the minute you hear, here's what you're going to do. People get their backs up and like, don't tell me what, it's just a rebellious thing. But when you deliver it in a story, people, before they even know they subscribe to what you're saying, they're like this. Wow.
That's how our brains work. We organize information in narrative format. And what I found really fascinating about it is we do it naturally. So you start telling stories at the age of 3. That's why little kids are like, the red ball went to Mars and the tree came up. And you're like, what are you talking about? But their brains are organizing information and experiences in narrative so that they can recall it, so they can make decisions. And that's a powerful point that we all are storytellers. We do it all the time unconsciously. I think most people then need to be taught the step of how do you use this as a leadership tool? How do you use this as a tool to build genuine connection and belonging and relationships with all different types, with all different types of people? And there's power in doing that intentionally and consciously. And you can learn how to do it without being, a CEO or an executive or a marketer. There are ways that you can improve your, what I call narrative intelligence, to become a better leader and essentially build a more inclusive organization.
Absolutely. And what I deal with a lot of diversity and inclusivity as well when I speak. And I feel like I say this all the time. I say this to people when they say, how can I say, let's approach it like a child. Can we do that? Because when a child starts, and we always say, they're so cute. They're so, look how they just love each other. Look how because they don't have all of the stuff that you've been taught or the experiences. They're still innocent. So I always say, why don't we just approach it like a child? And I have a 5-year-old granddaughter, and she'll tell me all kinds of stories. And then I'll say to her, are you telling Abuela's story? She's like, yep. You told me right away, yep, this is a story. And then she'll continue on. So but she'll have my attention. How wonderful for us to unlearn some of the things that we have learned and have brought into our businesses and brought into the mainstream world of the marketplace. How wonderful for us to be able to unlearn through story. I love it. I love it.
Yeah. I love the term unlearning too. That's a huge part of it.
Yeah. I think it's huge. And I think there's a lot of people that complicate it and make it seem like it's this really big process. It's not that hard. It's not that hard, but it is a process. And storytelling is a great way to just open up that gate and go down that way. I love it. Narrative intelligence. I've used it. I've stolen that from you. Yes, I did. I was like, and so let me just say this. I went to work after. We're going to get into the questions, guys, I promise. But I went to work that day after I listened to the podcast, and I was just so engulfed by so many of the things that you said, because you speak my language. Like I use that, like white noise, like racism. Like, I've used that same type of analogy. And so I got to work and I was like, wow. And I said to my friend, who's also my business partner, I said, yo, B, his name's Orlando Bowen. I said, yo, B, I listened to this podcast. Yo, you need to listen to this podcast, dude. And he's like, what? I said, yo, this lady, man, I don't know who she is. I need to meet her though. Something has to go down because she's speaking like she knows me. Like she's talking like we're related. And he was like, what's her name? Christina Blacken. Oh, yeah, I know. I said, dude, please stop acting like you know people. And he really did know you.
He did. I know. That's so funny. Yeah, we met through a speaking group. That was awesome. Yeah, we were in the same speaking group together.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, what's up, Orlando?
So I thought he was playing with me, though. Oh, yeah, I know, because he jokes all the time. So I said, stop acting like you know Christina. No, I know Christina. I was like, wow, okay, great. Small world. I'm going to stalk her and I'm going to somehow become friends with her because I love her work and love what she has to do. And you said you grew up in Utah. So the first question I had, because that is just so like, what? I think I've only met 2 people from Utah in my life. Let me just say
that sounds accurate. That sounds right. They don't get out much. I'll tell you that much. Yeah.
And I am from New York City, and you meet people all the time. But I came here when I was 10. I'm in Toronto, Canada now, and it's just amazing how many people you meet here. But I think it's only one other person I met from Utah. But I'd love to know, what was your upbringing like, and how did it, if at all, guide you or lead you? You started to to speak on it a little bit. How did it really help you to find what you're doing right now? And it is, when did that light bulb come on, be like, yo, this is what I need to do? But how was your upbringing a part of that too?
Yeah. So the funny thing is, your reaction is usually what I get when I tell people I'm from Utah. They're like, there are Black people there. And I'm always like, yeah, there's like 2.5 of us. Most of them are my family, but there are people there. But really, it started out before I got to Utah. My family's from Memphis, Tennessee.
Okay.
And my grandmother had at the time 4 siblings. And it was in the late 50s when their family decided, it's a little rough down here. We got lynchings going on. We got the segregation and stuff. There's not a lot of job opportunity. Maybe we should go west. And that's because there was a lot more jobs. The train at the time was connecting to these other cities. So they traveled all the way across the country and then decided to settle in Utah because they had some family members there who had gone before. So they were really trailblazers. No one had ever been there before. They're like, we don't know. There's really not any Black people there, but we'll be kind of like the first, essentially.
Wow.
So they settled down. They were part of what's called the Great Migration, which was happening, I believe, between the 1920s and in the 1970s, when I think it was 20 million Black Americans at the time had moved and migrated from the South to various parts of the country.
Yeah.
And they decided, they're like, Utah's the place. It's got mountains. It's pretty. It's cheap. There's a lot of racism, but it's diet racism. It's a little bit more palatable. It's a little less aggressive. So let's see how we can survive. And then they've just stayed there. So majority of my family has been in Utah for decades. And I was raised there until I was 18.
Wow.
Essentially. And I'll give you one quick story that kind of summarizes some of the experiences I had as a kid. So I actually, when my parents were together, they were together until I was 7 and then got divorced.
Okay.
We lived in New Jersey for a brief period of time. When they divorced, we came back to Utah. And I remember I was around 7 or so in the first grade. And the first few weeks I was back in school. I was meeting all my classmates and I was all, smiley and friendly and kind of the gregarious stuff that I've always kind of been. And I remember meeting a classmate and they asked me, are you Mormon? And because that's just like a standard thing that kids will ask in Utah, because they're kind of conditioned to believe that everyone is Mormon, since a majority of the state and people who live in the state are Mormon. Right. And I was like, oh no, I don't. I'm not even sure what that is, right? Because I'm pretty young. I'm not 100% sure. And she goes, oh, that means you're going to hell.
Oh, whoa.
Like, excuse me? So that took me aback, because I'm like, you're giving me eternal damnation. We just met.
In grade 1.
Like, okay. So then I said to her, I'm like, well, how do you know that? Yeah. And she says, because you're not Mormon. So then I go, well, are you the ultimate decider or God or some higher being?
Yeah.
She's like, no. And I'm like, then how would you know? And then she just stopped asking the questions, because I was like, this is a silly question to ask. So I had a lot of assumptions made, and people who essentially were so confused about somebody who wasn't in an in-group. So from a very young age, I had to become comfortable with being uncomfortable, with not being in any kind of main group. And that ultimately became a strength over time, because I was able to kind of interact with anyone, be comfortable as myself anywhere, because I had nothing to lose. It didn't matter how I tried to adapt or become a chameleon. I was never going to be fully accepted as that. So I had to be accepted as myself. And that wasn't an easy process. But eventually my classmates, respected me and knew who I was and what I stood for. And I didn't make a lot of concessions because I didn't care or had anything to lose. I wasn't in the in-groups anyways. Yeah. So I was on the outside of not only the dominant religious group in that community, but also the political groups. Most of the politics in that area is very conservative. And I was also racially a minority. So at the time, I think it was like less than 1% of people who live in Utah are Black. It might be a little bit more now, but it was really small. And so I was like one of few Black kids in my entire school for most of my childhood. Ironically, though, I had a large Black community that I was part of because of the other migratory families who'd been there forever. And it was mostly through the Baptist church system. So I knew a whole bunch of Black people, but it was not in the school setting it was like outside of that, which was really interesting.
Got it. So from the very beginning, you did not fit into the status quo.
No. Not at all. I was like, oh word, I'm going to hell according to my classmates. So I'm like, I guess I'm got nothing to lose at the moment.
Right. Which is so like as a child as well. Like to even think like that, it's a little extreme.
It's a little extreme, and it was definitely so eye-opening to me, and why I think story is so fascinating, because she had been taught a specific religious story, and that religious story affected how she interacted with people, for better or for worse, right? And so that essentially became a barrier for genuine connection, understanding, and curiosity. And not to say that like every religious text or teaching is limiting, but particularly in her story and in this context, she essentially was like, here's my assumption about somebody who doesn't fit this story or narrative, and thus I'm not going to make a genuine connection or feel that curiosity that's necessary to really learn who you are beyond stereotype and beyond assumption. So I think that process is fascinating, because most of us make huge assumptions about people based on a few key factors we collect about them, but we don't know anything about their actual full life story or their perspectives or their values or anything. And I think slowing down that process of assumption, which everyone does, is a huge part of my work, and why I'm so passionate about the process of using story to unpack and unravel some of this stuff.
Yeah. And I think it's necessary in order for us to not to attribute certain characteristic traits to people, for us to do that, as well as to be curious. Like, I don't know anything about you. Let me ask. I think that we love being in control and summing up people. Oh, she looks like this, or he looks. I remember being around someone who took one look at somebody and said, oh, they must be ba 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 ba. And I was like, how you could get all of that from 3 seconds of just glancing at you? Didn't even look hard, so I agree. You didn't even give a good look. You just and then this person is, and I was like, wow.
But what's so interesting about that process, and I love to talk about this in the work that I do, is the psychological evolutionary reason we do it. So many times we jump to these assumptions because we think it will protect us from harm. It will protect us from uncertainty and risk. And sometimes in little moments it does, but many times this quick sort of biased decision making does not collect enough information. So you're making snap judgment decisions off of imperfect information. So that causes all types of issues, right? Where you're like, I made all these assumptions and now I've missed out on genuine collaboration, problem solving, more intimacy, all these other things that could have benefits, because my brain was freaking out about something different and other. So I think how people respond to difference and othering, it gets conditioned in us. Like you said, as kids are very curious. They don't jump to conclusions because they don't have any to make, because they're just an open kind of canvas in a lot of ways. And then you get conditioned over time to have all these little narratives and stereotypes that then allow you to jump to these conclusions. So I think it's fascinating to understand that, yes, your brain has been trained that way. And some of it's because back in the day we was running from cheetahs and whatever. We had to make quick decisions. A whole bunch of information very quickly. And now these visceral threats, there's still a lot of different threats in our lives because of man-made reasons many times. But fighting the environment and still figuring out how to survive, our brains use some of that shortcut thinking. So we have to train ourselves out of some of that and slow that process down.
Yeah. And that's an intentional process that you gotta be, I'm going to do this. Like, and I love the fact that you said, like, there's so much, and this is why I'm about authenticity all day, every day, authenticity, because with authenticity, you actually have to stop and think about, what is it that I really feel right now that I'm going to tell you? What is my opinion on A, B, and C, or whatever it is that you do? Let me think about that so I can give you an honest answer. That's something that we don't do because of what you just said, uncertainty. So many times we want to be in control and we want to be certain about things. Yet at the same time, it's the uncertainty that's the spice of life.
There we go. Exactly. Our ability to see uncertainty not always as a threat, because we don't know what's going to happen. It could be good or bad. I think we have a negativity bias. Again, I love science, I love psychology. So I'm like, the negativity bias is really interesting. And it's an over-amplification of the worst case scenarios. And many times when you over-amplify worst case, you're not allowed to dream and imagine and to aspire. And it really curtails your motivation. So a lot of this stuff, especially around social issues, when people are like, ain't nothing going to change, we're going to hell in a handbasket, all that. I'm like, I get what you're saying. But when you're to that level of extreme pessimism, you're not taking any action, which then only guarantees the status quo stays the same.
Absolutely.
So you have to do a different kind of planning. I actually was talking about this recently because at the beginning of the pandemic, I was about to close my business. And that was because everything I was doing at that time was in person. So I was doing trainings at conferences, at companies. I'm doing these facilitated learning experiences and these story sharing conversations. And then the pandemic hit. And that was very dangerous to be in groups for hours at a time, talking at each other when we didn't know how this virus spread. So I essentially lost every single client in February of 2020. And at the time I was like, well, I got to sit down and make a 360 plan. And the plan was thinking through the worst case, middle case, and best case scenarios. So I thought about what's the worst possible thing that can happen? What are the triggers that signal that the worst thing is evolving? And then what will I do when those triggers occur? And it allowed me to be honest about the risks that I currently faced, but then to also think about the best case scenarios and how I could potentially change my business model, stretch my skills. And so I decided, you know what, my work is still just as impactful in a digital way. I have a digital content marketing, et cetera, background. I built campaigns and, motivated hundreds of thousands of people in those campaigns in various like pro-social roles. So I knew how to take my work was in person and make it an impactful online experience. So I was like, well, that was on my to-do list for next year, but we got to speed it up because we're in a pandemic. So I started to experiment and built out an online course experience, built a facilitated conversation through webinar experience, built out a training experience, and went from there and just started to repitch things to clients. And essentially my business exponentially grew. After shifting the business model. So that even though it is an inflection point that could have ended my business, it essentially helped it grow much faster and made it much more flexible and manageable as a solopreneur by switching that model. And I was only able to do that through that 360 planning. So the reason why I brought up this long rambling story is because we essentially have the power to reframe uncertainty and to be honest about all the possibilities. I think if you focus only on the good, you're being kind of naive and maybe rose-colored glasses. If you only focus on the bad, then you are cutting off the possibilities that are genuinely attainable, that are positive. So it's good to have a picture.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Thank you for that long story. I don't care if it's long, but it's necessary because when we're talking about uncertainty, that's one of the main reasons why we stop our growth or stunt our growth. And now we're stuck doing the same thing. And if you always do what you always done, you always get what you've always gotten. So we're not going to get out of a rut if that's what we really want to do by doing the same thing, but we're afraid. We're going to pause for the cause and do a really quick commercial, but we'll be back with Christina Blacken.
Tap into a sisterhood of women founders and entrepreneurs with the PGW sorority. Go to PrettyGirlsWork.com and click on Pledge PGW. Fill out your pledge form and pay your monthly or annual dues. Request access to our members-only Facebook group. Then join houses that are specific to your industry or the skills that you want to develop in your business. You can take advantage of free tools and resources and gain access to courses, workshops, masterminds, small group coaching, and private mentorship exclusive to members. Pledge PGW and start scaling your business today.
We are back with Miss Christina Blacken. I love that we were just speaking about changing things, changing your perspective on uncertainty. I'm so glad you didn't close your doors. You know how sad I'd be? I would be really sad.
Me too.
I would be sad. And not just I would be sad because, I think your work is awesome, but how many other clients who need a Christina Blacken and the New Quo to come in and show them how to unlearn and show them how to shift and show them how to pivot in the midst of a pandemic. You know what I'm saying? That's necessary. Your what you do is extremely necessary. So thank God you still
Thank you. Yeah, and it was a real huge learning, and it also made me realize that being flexible and adaptable is critical. No matter if you're a business owner or not,
100%.
there are so many people who I saw dig their heels in and were like, I ain't changing nothing because the world's coming back in this summer. I remember there were other people in my space who were public speakers and trainers, and they're like, I ain't changing a thing. What's Zoom? I don't even know what a Zoom is. And they essentially died out like the dinosaurs because that's what they did. They weren't able to adapt and evolve. And I'm like, I'm not trying to be like that. How do I still make a great experience and have an impact and do it in a way that's safe and it's adaptable for what we have to do.
Exactly. And and the thing is, it's not even something that's just, well, let's offer this. No, it's necessary. It's
Yeah.
necessary if we're going to thrive. And yeah, and people that don't, like I said, you'll be out like Blockbuster. God bless
Yeah.
them. Anyway, no shade, Blockbuster.
Right. Yo.
Y'all didn't do it. Y'all didn't do it. Netflix came and killed y'all. Anyway, y'all keep it moving. Um, what about mentors? I mean, I hear you say that you had your community in Utah, and it wasn't necessarily in school or in those places, but did you have a mentor? And if you did, what was one of the greatest, or do you have mentors even right now? And what was one of the greatest things that you've learned as you grew and grow as a businesswoman that will help you continue to want to make a difference?
So I don't know if I necessarily had mentors, but I did have people who gave me critical invitations, is what
Mm,
I call them, because they changed the trajectory of my life. And one of those people was my vice principal of my high school. I actually forget her name, which is terrible. I need to look it up because she
mm.
essentially is why I ended up on the East Coast. I live in New York City now. I've been in New York for 11 years. And she, yeah, but New York City. But she essentially, while I was in my senior year and figuring out what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go to college, I was getting all these mailings to my house of various prestigious schools like Harvard and Yale and
Yeah.
Stanford and all this stuff, right? And I thought that they were just spamming people. I thought that all colleges just sent out pamphlets to the entire country and just spam folks because, people just send out spam.
Yes.
So
Yes.
there was one day when I was talking to her in the office and she's like, oh, how's like college applications going? And I'm like, it's really weird. I've been getting like all these pamphlets from these schools. And she's like, well, what schools are they? And I'm telling her the schools. And she's like, Christina, those colleges don't just send pamphlets to everybody in the country. Like, that's not how it works. Like, they send it to people who they genuinely believe could benefit from this or who are showing some level of aptitude or whatever. Like, you should seriously consider applying. And I
Mhm.
was like, oh, really? I should take this seriously. So then I set out on the strategy, which looking back now is kind of a little silly, but I wanted to prove a point where I could apply to some of the most prestigious,
Yeah.
challenging schools in the country. And that's what most of the schools I applied to were that. And then I had some safety schools in Utah. But if she hadn't said, they want you and there's something in you that they would like to see, I
Yeah.
wouldn't have applied. So there was this critical invitation because she could see things in me that I wasn't recognizing. And
Yeah.
I had another in church actually. So I'm no longer a churchgoer, but I went to my local hometown Baptist church, which my grandmother had gone to and all her siblings had gone to. So it was like a long standing
Yeah.
generation history. New Zion Baptist Church, shout out.
Come on.
And I was there until, my late teens into 20s. And we had at the time, she was a pastor, or I think an assistant pastor. I forget what the technical term is.
Yeah.
And she had asked me this summer, so this was the year before when I was a junior, before my senior year of high school. And she was like, oh, did you hear about this program called LEAD? And I'm like, oh, no, what is that? She's like, oh, it's this really great business program for high school students to be exposed to other industries and to get them on these various college campuses. Like my daughter just did it. She had an incredible time. I think you should apply to it. So I looked it up and I was like, I don't know about this. But then I applied last minute and ended up getting in and I got essentially assigned to Cornell University, which is why and how I ended up getting into Cornell.
Okay.
So she hadn't, again, been like, have you heard of this thing? I think you'd be great for it. I
Yeah.
wouldn't have applied. So there was those kinds of moments in my
Mm.
young childhood where people would recognize or see something and give me the appropriate invitation. And I
Yeah.
would say, I did have to say yes to those invitations.
Yes.
But if I hadn't gotten them to begin with, I don't think I would have necessarily been where I am right now.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I love the fact that you don't talk about the fact that there was this nurtured relationship, but it was just, you said, critical invitations. Hey, have you considered this or have you thought about that? I
Mhm.
love that because sometimes we look at mentors as I was speaking to one lady from Shopify, my dear friend Lauren Ernst, and she was like, I did this whole thing like, would you be my mentor? Like it was like a mentor proposal type of thing. And she was just like, yeah, it's not necessary. It's not. I think that sometimes we again, have a perspective of what a mentor should be. I said, yo, you're my mentor, Christina, by the way. You know, you're someone who I look to. I'm on Instagram and I follow you. When you be putting stuff up, I'd be like, girl, we should talk about this, because it's about who can inspire you. It's not necessarily always, or who can help you see things from a different perspective. It's not always a full on, let's nurture this relationship, let's talk once a week, it doesn't necessarily have to be like that. It actually can come through a question, through an invitation, through somebody doing something online, you going, wow, I'm going to go and do this now. Like, mentorship can come in so many different ways.
It really can. And it can come also from you sharing your truths and who you are. And I think every time I've shared what I'm excited about, what I'm passionate about, what I'm working on, people will recognize or remember it and be like, oh, you were working on that thing, or you said you're really passionate about this. Have you heard of this? Which is why, again, going back to authenticity, it's so important to do that, because if people don't know what you're interested in or stand for, they can't give you the invitations.
There you go.
They can't help you out. They can't be like, I saw this thing and I think you'd be great for it. So I think mentorship is also a two-way street of expressing yourself fully to the people that you trust, whether you talk all the time or not. And then when they do recognize something that aligns, then being like, oh, I get that. I appreciate that. I see what you're trying to support.
Yeah. I think that, that's so key. I think that that's so key. And for anyone that's listening, man, don't count out the people around you. Never know. Be authentic. Have those conversations. Let people know what you're passionate about, what's in your heart. You never know how you might be someone that they consider when they're thinking about something else. Here's another question I have for you, and this is something that I'm very passionate about as well. The line between personal and professional, I feel like they intersect all the time. I feel like personal life and professional life intersect and overlap all the time, but often for some reason people, want to put on masks and pretend like this is my professional and it cannot touch my personal. I feel like they have to, in order for authentic leadership to actually be present, I feel like they have to at some point connect. Do you think that there is a delineation between personal and professional? What do you think about that? What do you think about that when it comes to authentic leadership?
The first thing I think of is, with the authenticity conversation, I don't think we talk enough about psychological safety, because you can't be authentic in unsafe places. And as we've seen with certain marginalized identities, being authentic could also mean violent responses. It could mean legal responses. So I think you can be authentic as much as you can, depending on the environment and space you're in. Some companies facilitate safe spaces really well, which means they're non-judgmental, they're curious and open. They don't assume that you have to conform in a very particular box to be taken seriously or to be seen as professional or to be developed or promoted. If your environment has those qualities, then yes, you could show up authentically, which is of the benefit to everybody, because then people get your full self, they get better ideas from you. You're able to navigate the ups and downs of how your personal life affects your professional life, because they're all interconnected. But I think that part is very critical, because a lot of people are like, authenticity at work, woo! And then they're in these toxic, combative, terrible spaces that if you show up as your full 100% authentic self, it's used against you, it's weaponized against you. And so I think that's incredibly important. And I've been in spaces where I've brought as much as myself as I possibly can. And sometimes that actually led to a negative outcome that I'm glad it did, because I was in the right environment for me anyways. But that was the risk that I took, because that environment wasn't adaptable. So yeah, I believe that our full selves should be part of work, because it is just another extension of your life. And I don't think you have to necessarily let it all hang out if you don't have a safe environment. And also if there's certain traumas and things that are private, that aren't processed, that usually are going to just like closest trusted people in your life, it's totally okay to do that as well. So it's a sort of dance of like, I'm those people who I just do not care and want to conform to certain things. That's one reason why I moved out of certain corporate environments and then ended up being an entrepreneur, because this idea of playing certain game, I just didn't play the game. I was never one of those people who's like, well, if I show up this way and do that, I'm gonna move forward and win. I just didn't care to play that game. So I think we're seeing that gap close more and more, especially in the pandemic. People were like so much transparent because they have to be.
You
We're dealing with,
you see, you have in the background, like it's real. It's real.
It's so much real. And I think also our definition of professionalism and the narratives around it is inherently built on white supremacist ideology, which people do not unpack enough. They don't talk about enough. A lot of it's built on this idea of you have to look a very specific way, sound a certain way, have a certain sum of income, have a certain level of sexual orientation, be a certain gender to be seen as a leader, to have power, to have a voice. And that was built into our laws and practices up until really recently. I mean, certain groups could not vote until literally 5 seconds ago. So like our ideas of leadership and who should be in power have been conditioned for centuries and decades. And the people who argue back, well, that was in the past. The past was literally 5 seconds ago. And as we know, the past does affect the present. It does have a legacy and a history and remnants and impacts right now in the present day because of what happened in the recent past. 100%. So I think that's something that we all have to consider in the authenticity conversation.
I agree. And I'm glad you brought that part up, that, the white supremacy, understanding that professionalism is really coming from another system of thinking, that if you subscribe to that, then that makes sense to you. But if you don't, and if you're not included into that club, you might be the oddball out. And so professionalism, what does that look like to you? Oh, you got to be in that club. So you got to pull your hair back. So we've got to wear dark clothes. So you have to be a man. So like, it's so many other things now, other hoops that you put together that I need to jump through. I'm not the one.
And the gag of it all is it's not good for people who fit all those boxes either, because many times they're performing. So the people who have all those qualities also feel limited and constrained and unhappy and disconnected. They don't have the freedom of total self-expression and creativity. So that's why these conversations around why does equity matter? Equity is beneficial to everybody, both the people on the top and the people on the bottom of a stratified system. So I think if we are going to reach our fullest potential and create at our highest levels and innovate in the ways that are necessary to face all the very significant economic, environmental, and social challenges that are literally here right now, we have to move these inequitable systems out of the way, because it's not allowing us to create at our highest levels.
Exactly. And the creativity and the innovation. I'm so sorry, I'm getting hot.
Same, I'm like, oh, my lights, got all these lights on. Oh, it's hot.
It's hot in here. But the creativity and the innovation that is lost because of it, I think people that they don't really realize it because you've never had it, because you continually, deal with this particular mind frame of what professionalism is, and you're very restricted. Let that go, and you'll see the amount of innovation, creativity, problem solving that could happen and catapult us so much further than where we are right now. I just feel like that is it's a missed opportunity if we don't make those changes. But I do agree with you. We need brave spaces, and they have to be nurturing environments where people are allowed to fail and make mistakes and still be okay. It's all right. We made this mistake. Let's learn from it and keep it moving, without the judgment, without the I'm going to sabotage this person's job because they messed me up, or what, without all of that. And that is challenging. That is challenging. But I'm here for it, man. And I'm going to be a proponent of someone who continually pushes people to be their most authentic self in those brave spaces, because I think it's such a necessary way of approaching business and people.
Yeah. I think of the analogy of like a boat with many holes in the bottom. So racism and sexism, imagine they're like poking all these holes in this boat that you're in, and you're constantly finding ways to try to plug the holes up, and it's not quite working. And so the boat is sinking. If we had filled those holes up permanently, we would spend less time forking water out of the boat and actually going to a beautiful island or another destination. Like I think right now so much of our energy is on survival and filling up the holes that are caused by all these inequalities, instead of using our brain power and energy to move towards new destinations, new frontiers, new horizons. And so that's what I talk about a lot in my work, is what would happen? What does radical imagination look like when we aren't in the constraints of inequality? What does that look like? What is radical imagination? And it comes from plugging up those holes.
Listen, don't make me run in this place. She said radical imagination. What is radical imagination? What? Think outside the box. Come on. It's like there is no box. It's like the Matrix. There is no spoon. Come on.
Yep.
Radical imagination. If we could ever, can we get there? Oh, I'm so glad you didn't go out of business, girl. We would have never heard that. I'm stealing it. I'm telling you right now. You are my if you didn't know. Okay. Last question. If you were speaking to knowing all that you know now, and I really feel like almost like this is not even necessary, but I'm gonna ask anyway. All that you know now, if you were to speak to the younger Christina that was heading into corporate, that was going into her job, knowing what you know now about the desperate need of authenticity we just spoke about, what would you say to her so she doesn't put on a mask for people? What would you say?
I would say to my younger self that trust your intuition, because I had a lot of really strong intuition about things. And I'm really grateful for my younger self when I knew something wasn't working and I had gotten the most that I can out of an experience that I moved on.
Yeah.
Like when I first started my career, I was in the law world. I worked at a litigation firm with 500 lawyers. And I thought I was going to change the world one legal brief at a time. I was like, ooh, this is me. I'm about to be on my Alley Bill or something out here. Whatever. And it was terrible in the sense it was this very oppressive, very old school hierarchy that just did not fit for me. And I was supposed to be in the program for 2 years. And 9 months into it, when I started to work 24-hour shifts, I was like, this is not for me. This is not working. I'm not learning the ways that I thought I would. I'm really unhappy. My quality of life is tanking. I'm literally getting home to my roommates and they're like, girl, you have the same clothes on. I've been at work for 24 hours. That's why. So I trusted intuition to move, but sometimes I would question myself and be like guilty or like, am I doing the right things? And I just would tell her, continue to trust your intuition when it comes to relationships and friendships. Don't make excuses for certain behaviors. Don't be so empathetic that you are underestimating what your needs are and what you want. Be strong in your own needs, even if you are the lone wolf or the whistleblower or the person who's calling truth to things that people don't want to talk about. Because I was doing those things and I felt bad. I'm like, maybe I'm the weirdo. Like, why am I feeling like this environment's super toxic and everyone else is just going along with it? Why am I the one person calling out the CEO? Why am I the, and I was never abrasive or aggressive. I was just trying to make things better, seeing problems where they were, providing solutions, which is very important to be solutions oriented.
Yeah.
And I didn't sometimes trust my intuition. So I would tell her that, like, your intuition's strong, trust it, continue to move forward. Yeah. And if there are naysayers, don't listen to them because you are going to prove them wrong.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that. We don't talk about intuition as much as we should. I talk about it all the time. And I say to the young people that are in the office, I'm like, you need to listen intuitively. You need to actively listen, but listen intuitively as well. Listen to what your gut is saying and believe it. Yeah. Because majority of the time, there's a vibe or there's something in the air or there's a body language that you can't necessarily put your finger on or call it, but there is something there. Pay attention. I love that. I love that because what you do is you honor yourself when you listen to your own intuition. There's something internally that's saying, proceed with caution, or can you stop right here? Because this is not a good, or as you said, this is toxic in here. We need to get up out of here before we all turn our minds into mush or, whatever it is. I love the fact that you said, listen to your intuition because intuition
also goes back to that narrative of we've been conditioned to distrust ourselves.
Right.
So when you think about your own decision-making, you're taught from a very young age that you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't do this. You shouldn't think that. Yeah. And so over time, you're conditioned to always believe that someone knows so much more than you and that you don't know anything. And yes, it's great to listen to people with expertise and experience, but you also have something to give. I think every person has a unique life perspective and experience and wisdom that they've accumulated from their unique life path 100. That should also be acknowledged. There are people who maybe know nothing about technology, but they're really in touch with agriculture and how the cycles work and how like all the intuition and things that we've lost touch with because we're not as in nature as we used to be, or people who are really great at emotional intelligence and reading people and understanding the intricate dynamics of different conversations. Like there's so many skills that we all have that we shouldn't be to a point of not listening to people, but we should also not ingest so much all of the fears and the hesitations and the anxieties that society tries to press onto you about your own values and your own intuition.
And what you feel. And a lot of times, 100%, Christina, and a lot of times you don't know what somebody's going through. Even if they come into a meeting, they can be going through a lot, and then they start projecting on you, and you're thinking, is it me? I do this all the time. I'm like, Jesus, is it me? Is it me, God? Did I do something? Why is she so angry? You know? And so it's really just being able to honor yourself and really listen and pay attention. Pay attention. I love it. What do you do, Miss Christina Blacken? What do you do on a daily basis to stay true or authentic with yourself so that you can share that person with others?
I definitely laugh on a daily basis. I love finding comedy. I saw this clip today of a podcast that I listened to where they were making fun of this issue with their merchandise because they always have people who are like, where's my merchandise? And this man went into this funny joke. He's like, well, where's your address? Where's your size? If you do not fulfill the requirements, you will not get your merchandise. So they're just like going through this funny joke about it. And I was cracking up, and I sent it to a friend because she has a business where she has this beautiful hair product and she's dealing with issues of supply chain that so many companies are dealing with right now. So she's had angry people in her emails, and she's like, I emailed you 5 times already, but like you haven't read none of the emails. So you gotta read your emails if you want your products. Just funny life memes and comedy that can bring light to the truths that we're living in. I think comedy has played such a huge part in my family's life and my life. We're all kind of jokesters and crack jokes, and so that's a huge part of my day-to-day. And also music. I love music. I'm a singer. I love singing and dancing and listening to music on a daily basis.
You could sing.
Yeah. So I love doing that on a daily basis. And whether it's putting on music while I'm getting ready and making breakfast, or it's singing something on Instagram, or I sing in a lot of my trainings and do all types of stuff, that to me feels like me fully expressing myself and bringing some joy and levity into my day-to-day. I think play and levity is really important, and we don't have enough of it as adults. So that's a huge part of me trying to just like cultivate that on a regular basis.
I love it. I feel like you're my twin. I just want to say I feel like, is she me or am I her? Which one is it?
Twin flames.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah, because there is a Kevin Hart video that I watch every time. I just have like, it's one of those days. And my whole family knows of it, and I will send it to them. and I'll send a voice note of me cracking up. And it was a BT Awards, and he was talking to Chris Brown, and he was trying to tell Chris Brown how to dance. And so you know how dancers, how they'll say 5, 6, 7, 8, and boom and cat. So he put up his own. He was like, it's a 17 count.
It's a 17 count.
He said, dance from the core. I don't like the core.
That's pretty funny.
It was too much. So I know I love to laugh. I'm with you all day. Christina, I can talk to you all day. I just need to let you know that we can do all night. What is next for you? What are your dreams, your aspirations, your goal? What are we to expect from Miss Christina Blacken?
So this is such a timely question because I've been spending a lot of time thinking about like, what is the future of the new Quo? Where are things going? And I realized really fundamentally at the core of my work is the idea of status quo breaking goals. So it's really setting goals that are inclusive, that are unconventional, that essentially help people to reach that full potential, and using the right messaging to get over the self-doubts that can stop you from certain goals, and also motivating a group of people towards those goals. So I realized, I just need to build a learning community outside of the B2B business to business stuff I've been doing. So I can sort of build this army of leaders who want to set goals that are not replicating the status quo, that are not conventional, that are exciting, that are multifaceted, that are socially conscious, environmentally conscious, and giving them the tools to get there. So that's really the next iteration, is taking all of the trainings and the frameworks and things I teach and building this sort of learning membership community where people can get training and tips and tools to set and achieve status quo breaking goals.
Let's go.
And I think also with that community, what will be really fascinating is to collect a lot of data from their personal experiences and storytelling and goal building, and using that to build a book. I want to build a book around achieving status quo breaking goals.
Come on, Miss.
And why I think it's so important, because everything that we do is we are goal-oriented species. And so right now, one of our primary goals is infinite growth. And that's a goal that started in the Industrial Revolution. And we've seen how that's worked out. It's not been great. It's led to a lot of inequity. It's led to a lot of environmental degradation. That's why I'm in New York City experiencing hurricanes. This is not a hurricane area, y'all, but now it is in climate change.
Now it is.
Yeah. So I'm like, how do we reframe the narrative of infinite growth to status quo breaking goals and that are reciprocal and regenerative? So I'm building out that framework, want to build the learning community, build the book, and then eventually evangelize it all over the world, essentially allowing people to, whether it's in their personal lives or professional lives, when they are taking on a leadership role, they're given a new framework of goal setting that allows them to achieve unthinkable things. That radical imagination we talk about can come from a new goal setting system. And it's really inspired by my life was changed when I interacted with goal setting through a new lens. I read this book called The Desire Map by Danielle Laporte. Yeah. And it's really just a framework of set your goals based on your values and what you desire emotionally. Yeah. It's not super crazy, but as you unpack it, you're like, I've never been taught to think about the personal goals that I'm setting and the emotional state I'm trying to achieve. And she has this really beautiful framework that's a little bit more spiritual and woo-woo, but a lot of it's also tactical. And that completely radically changed why I was setting certain goals and what I was doing. And I think a lot of people could benefit from that, because we usually set goals that are conditioned to us. We're told that these are the things we should care about and feel like we have to achieve in our personal and professional lives. And then many times we set goals that are not achievable because we don't know how to set goals that we can actually attain and move ourselves towards. So my work is really shaping up into that. I think I teach all of that anyways. But I think that can be really exciting and another iteration of everything. And then building more content. I had a podcast that I paused. I was doing it kind of regularly. And I want to get back into video. I've used to do a lot of fun interactive videos that teach some of these ideas and like posting them regularly. But the last year I was like, we're in a pandemic and I'm tired. I don't know if I can do it. So now I want to get back into content making regularly and putting it out into the world in a more consistent manner than I have been in the last year. So that's really where things are going. I'm excited. I think there's so many opportunities and potential for things to evolve and to grow. And it's nice to be able to be an entrepreneur in the sense that you don't know what direction your work can take, but as long as it's driven by a couple of fundamental questions that you're insatiably curious of answering, you can constantly iterate and build new things. So the questions I've always been fascinated by is, how does social change and personal change occur? Why does it occur? Why does it happen? How does it happen? And then how can we teach other people to be accepting of positive, inclusive change? And I think at that fundamental question, there's so many things that I've built trying to answer that question.
I love that. I love that. First and foremostly, you better preach, okay? Let me just say that. Second of all, and B, I should say.
Second and thirdly.
First of all, you better preach. And B, if you start an army, listen to me. I'm a soldier in the army of New Quo. I will be.
I'm soldier. Yep, that's a gospel song. But did you go? There you go.
Remember that church? Because you said Baptist, I know.
Yeah.
I'm a soldier in the army of New Quo. You hear me? Because in the army of New Quo, we can make.
I love it. No copyrights. No copyrights.
Listen, I will be the first one to be a member of your army, because I feel like I need you in my life. I need you in my business. I think that there's so many other businesses that I touch that need you as well. And as long as you out here making it, the books, the whatever you need to make, I will be there. Okay.
Thank you so much for the support. I truly appreciate it, especially because it's been lovely to have my work embraced, because for a long time, again, trusting the intuition, I was like, I don't know if anybody gets this. Right. I'm not sure. And at the beginning, people were like, that's cute. So you use story for what now? That's not for marketing. It's not for sales. Wait, what are you doing? And then eventually people were like, I get it. Oh, this makes sense. Or, oh, I want to know more, because this is a really interesting methodology. And so it's great to hear that affirmation back, because I almost abandoned it. again, this was before the pandemic. I was like, I don't know, but I trusted my intuition and kept forward. So I'm so glad to hear it resonates. And obviously, I would love to support your work. And I think this is such an incredible conversation. The questions are great, and just continuing to build platforms where people can have honest, raw conversations like this is so powerful.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you so much. I'm a soldier
In the army, love the Lord.
So at the end, we're coming to the end, and at the end, we always like to leave the show with a compelling thought. We always like to say, like, if there was one thought that you want the listeners to never forget, and I mean, if ever, you said so many wonderful things, but if you could say it in one sentence, or usually it starts like this: if you remember nothing else I've said, remember this. What would that be?
If you remember nothing else I said, remember that your life and the things that you want to do are on the other side of a status quo breaking story. Because whatever stories you believe, whatever stories you tell, they shape your mental health, they shape your emotions, they shape your relationships, they shape your behaviors. So you have radical power to change the trajectory of your life by changing the narratives.
Boom. Boom, drop the mic. It's over. It's a done deal. That's on period. I don't know what else to say, but that's a Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm crazy. I'm loud.
I love it. I love it.
But I really appreciate you being here and everything you said. It's been a blessing to my soul, and I know it will be for so many others. Y'all follow Christina Blacken on Instagram. Y'all check her out at The New Quo, www.thenewquo.com. Look out for her army and her book and the content that she's going to be. Please support this beautiful, beautiful Black woman who is doing so much for everyone in this world. I'm hoping that this spreads like wildfire, and I'll definitely be at the front yelling your name. Okay.
Thank you. Right at the front of the army, right? With the banner and stripes on. But I thank you again. I so appreciate the support and the collaboration. And I think that's how we change things, is we see the light in each other and we like, how do I lift you up? How do we get this work out? How do we, have more people be impacted in a positive way?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Christina, thank you for being here. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you.
I want to make sure that you guys subscribe. Make sure you hit the notifications. If this is your first time listening, to consider this. Don't let it be the last. If you are on Spotify and you're listening, make sure you follow us on Spotify, on Apple, on Stitcher. Listen, I really, really, really want this podcast to be something where you sit back and think and consider something that you hadn't considered before. I know Christina shared a lot. You're probably going to replay this, replay it, share it with someone else who may need to hear it. No matter what, know that considering things outside the box is going to help you better yourself and others. Thank you. Subscribe, hit the notification buttons. Thank you so much for being here. See you next time.